We can't wash men off. Period. No, I need you to hear me. We cannot wash men off. There will always be a remnant of the men that we've been with inside of our bodies for life. So if you are just filled with all of these different people, you know how many different soul ties, demon spirits you got in your body?
But so do men though.
No, men can wash us off.
I understand what you're saying because we are incubators and they are the whatever.
Penetrators, that's what they are.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that.
We are more emotional, they are more logical. Did you know the reason why we get so attached to men after we sleep with them is because we release a hormone that's similar to when we give birth. You are literally connecting to that person on such a different level.
Yeah.
Men are not like that. I'm speaking scientifically. They are not like that. It is a sport, especially for certain types of men. And for us to sit here and act like we could be just like men, that's wild to me. It's natural. It just is what it is. The way that we're wired is different.
We live in a time when sex is often presented as something simple, casual, and almost disposable. People meet, feel an attraction, share an intimate experience, and then move on as though nothing significant happened. In a world driven by dating apps, social media, instant gratification, and a culture that often celebrates unlimited access, many people have been conditioned to believe that intimacy only means as much as a personally decided means. But human beings aren't always able to separate the physical experience from everything else that surrounds it. The body may leave an encounter behind, yet the mind can continue replaying it. The relationship may end, but the emotional effects, habits, fears, memories, and expectations can remain long after the person has disappeared. That's why I believe we need to have a more serious conversation about what happens when we repeatedly allow different people into the most intimate areas of our lives. Can someone truly move from one sexual partner to another without carrying anything forward? Can a person simply take a shower, change the sheets, block a telephone number, and convince themselves that the experience has completely disappeared? Some people will say yes without hesitation, while others will argue that every deep, intimate experience leaves some kind of mark. Depending on your beliefs, you may call those marks emotional attachments, trauma, memories, conditioning, energy, or soul ties. The terminology may change, but the question remains powerful. What happens to us when we repeatedly connect with people who gain access to our bodies, emotions, vulnerabilities, and private lives? I'm not interested in making claims that can't be honestly supported. Science doesn't establish that a person literally absorbs demons, spirits, personalities, or supernatural entities from every sexual partner. At the same time, science also doesn't support the idea that human intimacy is automatically meaningless. Sexual experiences can become connected to memory, emotion, attachment, pleasure, stress, fear, validation, and learned behavior. People can carry the effects of relationships long after those relationships end. And anyone who has watched a person struggle to trust after betrayal or watched someone remain emotionally attached to an ex years after the breakup understands that the past doesn't always disappear simply because the physical relationship is over. That's where the phrase, "you can't just wash them off," becomes much deeper than a statement about the physical body. Soap and water can remove what's on the skin, but they don't automatically erase what has entered the mind. They don't remove the insecurity created by betrayal, the fear created by abuse, the emotional hunger created by abandonment, or the habits developed through years of unhealthy relationships. If a person has repeatedly connected with individuals who brought chaos, manipulation, dishonesty, addiction, violence, or emotional confusion into their life, it's worth asking whether those experiences may continue influencing them after those people are gone. And that's where this conversation becomes bigger than judging someone's sexual history or using numbers to determine someone's value. The deeper issue is what each experience has done to the individual. What have you carried forward from the people you've loved, slept with, depended on, feared, trusted, or allowed into your private world? What lessons did they leave behind? What fears did they create? What desires did they awaken? What boundaries did they destroy? By the time a new person enters your life, are they meeting you, or are they meeting a version of you that has been shaped by an entire collection of people who came before them? Interesting question. People often use the phrase, "it was just sex," as though that automatically settles the matter. Sometimes it does. Some people genuinely experience an encounter without developing a lasting emotional attachment. But in other situations, calling something just sex may be an attempt to reduce an experience that has become more complicated than we want to admit. The physical act may have been brief, but the reasons behind it, the feelings surrounding it, and the consequences that followed may remain long after the moment itself has passed. Sex can involve more, much more, than physical attraction. It can become connected to loneliness, desire, insecurity, fantasy, love, power, fear, validation, rejection, money, survival, manipulation, secrecy, or the desperate hope that another person might somehow fill an emptiness inside. Two people can share the same bed while experiencing the encounter in completely different ways. One person may believe they're building a relationship while the other sees the moment as temporary entertainment. One may be seeking love while the other may simply be satisfying physical desire. One may walk away and never think about it again, while the other spends months wondering why the telephone stopped ringing. That's sad. The difference in experience is important because it shows why we can't automatically assume that sex affects everyone the same way. Human beings bring their physical histories into intimate situations. Someone who grew up feeling unwanted may experience sexual attention as proof of their value. Someone who has been betrayed may use physical intimacy while refusing emotional vulnerability. Someone who feels lonely may confuse being desired with being loved. Someone who has learned to associate sex with money or favors may carry a completely different understanding of intimacy into a future relationship. When these experiences happen repeatedly, especially without reflection, a person can begin developing patterns they don't even recognize. They may become addicted to attention, uncomfortable with emotional closeness, afraid of commitment, dependent on sexual validation, or suspicious of anyone who genuinely wants something deeper. The body may experience pleasure, but the mind can be learning something at the same time. Over years, those lessons can become habits, and those habits can follow a person into relationships that have nothing to do with the people who originally created them. Something to think about. But the idea of a soul tie is controversial because people understand it in different ways. For some, it describes a spiritual connection created through deep emotional or sexual intimacy. They believe that certain relationships create bonds that can remain long after the people separate. Others use the phrase less literally, describing an attachment that feels unusually powerful and difficult to break. Still, others reject the spiritual language completely, but acknowledge that relationships can leave emotional patterns that are extremely difficult to overcome. Whether a person interprets these experiences spiritually or psychologically, there's a recognizable human reality underneath the conversation. People can leave our lives and still influence our decisions. A person who was repeatedly betrayed may enter the next relationship expecting betrayal. Someone who is controlled may become defensive when a new partner simply asks an innocent question. A person who spent years being emotionally manipulated may struggle to believe genuine affection when it finally appears. Imagine a woman who escaped a relationship years ago, yet still hears the emotional echo of that relationship every time she gets close to another man. Nobody from her past is physically present, but the influence remains. Perhaps she was lied to so often that she now assumes every unexplained delay is evidence of deception. Perhaps she was cheated on so frequently that she feels compelled to investigate every relationship. Her new partner may be innocent, yet he's forced to deal with wounds that he didn't create. The same principle can affect men. A man who is constantly rejected, humiliated, cheated on, or financially used may carry those experiences into the new relationship. He may become emotionally guarded. He may chase sexual attention because physical access feels safer than emotional vulnerability. He may refuse commitment because he's convinced that every relationship eventually leads to betrayal. The former partner may be gone, but the lessons left behind continue operating inside of him. Whether someone calls these lingering influences soul ties, emotional baggage, attachment patterns, trauma bonds, conditioning, or unresolved memories, the central question remains the same. How much of the past are we carrying into the present? A new relationship may begin with two people sitting across from each other, but psychologically and emotionally, there may be years of history sitting at that table as well. Scary thought. When people talk about carrying somebody's energy, they may be describing something spiritual. They may genuinely believe that deep intimacy creates an unseen connection that continues after the physical relationship ends. Others may use the same language to describe emotional residue, the lasting influence of another person's behavior on the way we think and react. These two interpretations don't have to be identical for the larger conversation to matter. Imagine spending several years with someone who is constantly angry. Eventually, you begin anticipating conflict even when nobody is angry. You may become defensive before anyone has attacked you. You may raise your voice because you've learned that conversation eventually becomes an argument. The original relationship may be over, but the emotional atmosphere of that relationship has followed you into the next stage of your life. Now imagine someone who spent years with a dishonest partner. They enter a new relationship, but every late telephone call, unexplained trip, or delayed response becomes a possible sign of betrayal. Their current partner may have done nothing wrong, yet the past continues directing the emotional response. The former partner has become absent physically while remaining present psychologically. This is where the idea of energy becomes useful. Even for those who don't interpret it spiritually, we influence one another. We leave impressions. We teach people, sometimes without realizing it, how to expect to be treated. A loving relationship can teach someone to trust, while an abusive relationship can teach them to fear. A chaotic relationship can make peace feel unfamiliar. And a person who has spent years living in emotional confusion may actually become uncomfortable when life finally becomes calm. Now expand that idea across numerous intimate relationships. One person may have taught you to distrust, while another connected sex to money. Another made you feel desirable for the first time, while someone else introduced fear and shame into your private life. Another may have made you emotionally dependent. while someone else taught you that vulnerability leads to pain. By the time you meet a person who genuinely wants to build something healthy, you may be carrying a collection of lessons, memories, and reactions that were created by people who aren't even part of your life anymore. That's what makes the phrase, "you can't just wash them off," such a powerful idea. Whether you understand it as spiritual residue or emotional conditioning, the point is that intimate experiences can leave behind influences that aren't visible on the surface. A new partner may only see the person standing in front of them, but underneath that surface may be years of unresolved experiences waiting to be triggered. In the video that we played in the beginning of this presentation, the language of the woman as the incubator and the man as the penetrator may sound harsh, but underneath it lies an attempt to discuss the biological reality that men and women don't occupy identical roles in reproduction. Pregnancy occurs inside the woman's body. The woman's body can carry a developing child for months, and that physical reality makes sexual intimacy potentially different in a very practical sense. The risks and consequences connected to pregnancy aren't distributed equally between the sexes. Biological differences shouldn't be turned into absolute statements about emotional behavior. It wouldn't be accurate to say that every woman becomes deeply attached after sex, or that every man can walk away unaffected. Men can experience obsession, heartbreak, grief, emotional dependency, and trauma. Women can experience casual sex without emotional attachment. Human behavior is influenced by personality, upbringing, culture, hormones, personal history, circumstances, and individual beliefs. But recognizing those complexities don't mean we have to pretend that men and women are identical. Their bodies perform different reproductive functions, and social expectations often shape the way they approach sexuality. Many women may face the possibility of pregnancy, while men don't physically carry that consequence. Many men have been socially conditioned to treat sexual conquest as proof of masculinity, while women have historically faced different expectations and consequences regarding sexual behavior. These differences can influence how people approach intimacy. Some men may learn to separate physical pleasure from emotional attachment, not because men are incapable of feeling, but because they are taught to suppress vulnerability. Some women may experience intimacy as more closely connected to emotional safety, trust, and relationship expectations, though that certainly isn't universal. The problem begins when we turn general tendencies into rigid rules and refuse to recognize individual differences. The deeper point is that sexual intimacy isn't happening in a vacuum. Biology, psychology, risk, emotion, culture, and personal history all enter the room with the two people involved. Pretending that none of these factors matter because society has decided that everything should be casual, pretending that none of those factors matter because society has decided that everything should be casual doesn't make those factors disappear. Human beings are designed for connection in ways that we still don't fully understand. Hormones such as oxytocin play roles in childbirth, breastfeeding, social bonding, and sexual activity. But the science doesn't support a simple story where women automatically bond through sex while men experience nothing at all. Men also produce oxytocin, and people respond differently depending on circumstances, emotional context, personality, and the nature of the relationship. Still, the fact that the process is complicated doesn't mean intimacy has no emotional effect. Sexual experiences can become strongly connected to memory and association. Pleasure can become connected to a particular person. Vulnerability can be connected to trust. Rejection can become connected to shame. Physical closeness can awaken emotional needs that a person didn't even realize were present. Someone who repeatedly uses sex as a substitute for love may eventually struggle to tell the difference between being desired and being valued. Someone who uses intimacy to escape loneliness may become dependent on the temporary comfort it provides. Someone who receives attention only when they're sexually available may begin believing that their value depends on what they can offer physically. These patterns don't develop in every person, and they don't automatically result from having multiple sexual partners, but they can happen, and pretending that they're impossible does nobody any good. Human beings are capable of learning from repeated experiences, and sexual behavior can become connected to emotional patterns that influence future choices. One of the most difficult parts of this discussion involves situations where sex becomes connected to money, gifts, favors, housing, survival, or other forms of exchange. This subject requires maturity because people enter these circumstances for many different reasons. Some individuals are exploited. Some are financially desperate. Some are manipulated or trafficked. Others may knowingly choose a transactional lifestyle. But regardless of how someone entered that world, repeated intimacy with multiple people can potentially shape the way they understand relationships. A person may learn to separate emotional intimacy from physical access as a matter of survival. They may become skilled at appearing affectionate while emotionally protecting themselves. They may develop defenses that make sense in one environment but create difficulties when they later attempt to build a relationship based on trust and exclusivity. Imagine someone who has spent years learning that attention is connected to financial benefit. When they enter a relationship with a person who wants to build emotional closeness without constant financial transactions, there may be a confusion on both sides. The new partner may interpret certain behavior as coldness, manipulation, or dishonesty, while the other person may simply be operating according to habits developed over years of experience. That doesn't mean anyone who has sold sex or exchanged intimacy for resources is permanently incapable of love or loyalty. That's neither fair nor true. People can change, heal, and build entirely different lives, but it does mean that experiences can shape expectations. And a serious relationship requires both people to be honest about what they carry from the past. One of the most revealing ways to understand this subject is to look at what happens when someone begins a new relationship. A man may believe he's getting to know a woman based on the person she is today. Over time, however, he may discover that certain situations produce reactions that seem much larger than the circumstances. Perhaps he fails to answer the telephone quickly enough, and she's immediately convinced he's cheating. Maybe he has done nothing to create that suspicion, but a former relationship taught her that silence means betrayal. Perhaps he refuses to purchase something expensive, and she interprets it as a lack of love because previous relationships taught her to associate money with affection. Maybe he wants emotional closeness, yet she becomes uncomfortable because intimacy has previously been connected to manipulation or pain. From his perspective, it can feel as though he's dealing with people he's never met. He's responding to the consequences left behind by the person who cheated, the person who lied, the person who manipulated, the person who used money as control, or the person who has disappeared without explanation. Those individuals aren't physically present, but their influence may still be shaping the emotional environment of the new relationship. The same thing can happen to a woman dating a man. She may meet someone who appears emotionally distant, sexually detached, or suspicious of commitment. She may assume that he's simply incapable of love, but perhaps his behavior developed after years of betrayal, rejection, humiliation, or emotional manipulation. Maybe casual sex became a way for him to enjoy physical intimacy without risking emotional pain. Maybe he learned that vulnerability was dangerous, and now he doesn't know how to let anyone get close. This is why I reject the idea that only women carry the residue of past intimacy. Men carry it too. A man may not describe it in spiritual language. He may never call it a soul tie or emotional attachment. He may hide it behind sexual conquest, anger, work, silence, or emotional distance. But hiding an influence doesn't mean it isn't there. The idea that men can sleep with countless women and remain emotionally untouched, while women are automatically changed by every intimate experience, is too simplistic. Men feel, men remember, men grieve. Men can become emotionally dependent. Men can carry heartbreak for years and never admit it because they've been trained to believe that vulnerability makes them weak. Some men respond to emotional pain by replacing one relationship with another. Instead of grieving, they distract themselves. Instead of examining why they feel lonely, they search for another sexual encounter. Instead of admitting that a woman hurt them, they convince themselves that they never cared in the first place. Over time, this behavior can create its own emotional damage. A man may become so accustomed to separating physical intimacy from emotional connection that genuine vulnerability becomes difficult. He may know how to attract someone, but not how to trust them. He may know how to begin relationships, but not how to maintain them. A large number of sexual partners doesn't automatically represent freedom, strength, or masculinity. Sometimes it represents exploration. Sometimes it represents desire. And sometimes it represents a person trying to fill a space inside themselves that no amount of attention can permanently fill. The same principle applies to women. Numbers alone don't explain a person's emotional condition, but patterns and motivations can reveal a great deal. Modern culture often represents unlimited sexual access as a form of liberation. The message is that adults should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies without anyone questioning the consequences. Personal freedom matters, but freedom doesn't eliminate consequences. A person can be free to make a decision and still be affected by that decision. We understand this principle in almost every other part of life. Freedom to spend money doesn't guarantee financial security. Freedom to eat without restraint doesn't guarantee good health. Freedom to trust anyone doesn't protect someone from betrayal. Sexual freedom also doesn't automatically guarantee emotional freedom. Some people may enter casual relationships believing they exercise control over their lives, only to discover that they have become dependent on attention, validation, novelty, or the temporary relief that intimacy provides. A person can have access to many bodies and still be emotionally isolated. They can be constantly desired while feeling completely unloved. They can move from one encounter to another while never experiencing the peace of being genuinely known. That's why the question isn't whether adults should have control over their own choices. They should. The question is whether we're being honest about the possible emotional, psychological, relational, and, for those who believe it, spiritual consequences of those choices. People who believe strongly in soul ties often believe that unhealthy connections can be broken. They may seek healing through prayer, forgiveness, spiritual guidance, repentance, or intentional separation. Others approach the same process through counseling, therapy, self-reflection, trauma recovery, and behavioral change. The language may be different, but the process often begins with the same requirement: honesty. You have to recognize that something from the past is still influencing the present before you can begin dealing with it. A person who realizes that they use sex to escape loneliness can begin asking why they're lonely. Someone who discovers that they seek constant validation can examine the insecurity beneath that behavior. Someone who notices that they can keep choosing destructive partners can begin examining the pattern. Healing doesn't require a person to hate their past. It requires them to understand it. You can acknowledge your history without allowing it to become your permanent identity. You can recognize mistakes without believing that you're permanently defined by them. No one should be told that they are spiritually contaminated beyond repair because of their sexual past. That kind of thinking can create shame without creating healing. At the same time, pretending that every experience leaves no effect can create another form of denial. The healthier approach is somewhere between those extremes. Your past matters, but it doesn't have to own your future. What you've experienced can influence you, but influence isn't the same thing as permanent imprisonment. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that physical separation automatically creates emotional separation. A person can leave a relationship while their thoughts remain trapped inside of it. They can enter a new home while still living emotionally in an old situation. This is why some people repeat the same destructive relationship with different faces. They may sincerely believe that they've encountered the same type of person again and again, but sometimes they're unconsciously choosing what feels familiar. A person who grew up around chaos may find peace uncomfortable. Someone who experienced love through manipulation may struggle to recognize healthy affection. The past can become a template. Without recognizing it, we may begin measuring every new person against the people who came before them. We may punish a loyal partner for another person's betrayal. We may reject healthy affection because an unhealthy relationship taught us to distrust it. That's another way of understanding the idea that people can remain with us after they've left. They may not remain through some literal supernatural presence. They may remain through the patterns they help create inside of us. Perhaps we need to ask deeper questions before allowing someone into our most private spaces. Who is this person beyond physical attraction? What are they carrying from their past? What am I carrying from mine? Am I lonely, or am I genuinely interested in this person? Am I seeking validation? Am I trying to forget someone else? We also need to ask what the other person expects. Are both people experiencing the relationship in the same way? Is one person hoping for commitment while the other expects nothing beyond the night? Is one person emotionally vulnerable while the other is completely detached? These aren't questions designed to remove pleasure or romance from life. They are questions designed to bring awareness into something that can be extremely powerful. Physical access can happen quickly, but emotional consequences can sometimes take years to understand. Every experience has consequences, although those experiences aren't always immediate or obvious. Sometimes the effects of repeated behavior appear years later, after a person has already built habits they don't fully understand. Someone who repeatedly used sex for validation may eventually discover that attention no longer makes them feel secure. Someone who constantly avoided emotional closeness may realize that they have forgotten how to allow another person to truly know them. Someone who repeatedly moves from relationship to relationship may discover that they've never learned how to sit alone with themselves. This doesn't happen to everyone who has casual sex, and it's important to be honest about that. People are different, experiences are different, but the possibility of emotional consequences deserves discussion without immediately labeling that discussion as judgment. The mature conversation isn't about shaming people or pretending that only one gender suffers consequences. It's about asking whether our choices are helping us become healthier, stronger, more self-aware people, or whether we're simply repeating patterns that kept us disconnected from ourselves and others. You can wash your body after an intimate experience, but washing the body isn't the same thing as erasing the experience. Memories can remain. Emotional reactions can remain. Habits can remain. Oh yeah, fear can remain. For those who interpret intimacy through a spiritual lens, They may also believe that deeper connections remain until they are intentionally broken. Whatever language we choose, the important point is that physical separation and emotional separation aren't always the same thing. I don't believe anyone should be condemned because of their past. A person isn't permanently ruined because of the people they've loved, the mistakes they've made, or the experiences they've survived. Human beings are capable of reflection, growth, healing, and transformation. But none of that can begin until we're willing to honestly examine what we've allowed into our lives and what we've carried forward. Men can carry emotional wounds and attachments just as women can. Women can experience detachment and emotional distance just as men can. The differences between the sexes deserve discussion, but we shouldn't use those differences to pretend that one side feels while the other side doesn't. Human beings may express pain differently, but pain can still remain beneath the surface for a very long time. The real question isn't simply how many people you've been with. The deeper question is what those experiences did to you. Did they teach you to trust or make you afraid? Did they make you wiser or leave you wounded? Did they help you understand yourself, or did they become another way to escape from yourself? Before we give another person access to our bodies, perhaps we should think about what access really means. Not because we're guaranteed to inherit someone's demons or permanently absorb their personality, because those claims can't be established scientifically, but intimacy can create memories, habits, attachments, fears, expectations, and emotional patterns that don't always disappear when the physical encounter ends. And maybe that's the lesson we need to remember in a culture that often treats everything as casual. Human beings aren't always casual, even when we try to convince ourselves that we are. We can leave the room while part of our emotional world remains connected to what happened there. We can start a new relationship while still carrying lessons from the old one. We can change our environment while unresolved experiences continue living inside our thoughts and reactions. So before you casually open a door to someone, understand that closing it later doesn't always mean that nothing entered. I hope you enjoyed these words. I hope these words made you think, because we have to think deep on these levels because there's just so much out here. It's not just about STDs, but it's about how a person's energy has affected us and left us with emotional scars or emotionally healed. That all depends on the relationship. Choose wisely. On to the next one. LanceScurv out. Peace.